existence in and of itself is something of a battle, oversaturated with like the doom and gloom of like dark dystopian futures. And superhero stories kind of takes that metaphorical conflict and externalizes it, where you have ordinary people who take on these mythic totems that allow them to transcend to a level greater than themselves. Despite all his power, like, he can only do so much, and he's still just a man. The man part is just as important as the super part. Find ourselves needing those kinds of optimistic stories that lift us up. We rise above these issues and become something greater than ourselves. Normalizing just being kind to folks, you know what I mean? Like, doing what you can to make a difference in the world. If one of my videos just for one moment can like make someone smile, make someone laugh, all the work that I put into it, everything I've had to sacrifice, it was all worth it. And like his granddad looks at him and he goes, do what you can.
I'm here today with Chris Markland, otherwise known as Supafly, who's built up a pretty sizable audience around his love for all things superheroes. Supafly, if you want to give a brief introduction to yourself, by all means, go ahead.
Yeah, sure thing, Jake. Thank you so much for having me. What's up, y'all? It's your boy Superfly, Toronto's Prince of Pop Culture. I make videos, regular content talking about all things Marvel, DC, Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers, all sorts of different nerdy stuff that like occupies my brain and my thoughts.
I love how we come from two opposite sort of ends of the nerd spectrum. Like, I'm the science fiction end of the nerd and you're the superhero nerds, and worlds are colliding. The multiverse is back, baby.
Hell yeah. We're going to get into that in this episode, I bet.
Oh, yeah. For people who don't know your content, what exactly is the Superfly persona?
I like to think of it as finding the funny in superhero / nerd cultures. Because I feel like a lot of people who are super fans of things like Marvel, like DC, things like Superman or like Batman or like these characters like super, super seriously, because of that like nostalgia factor where like a lot of folks grew up with these characters, idolized these characters, and even me to a certain degree, like I grew up with these characters, I idolize these characters as well. But there are also a lot of elements of those characters and those stories that like I feel like any one of us within the fandom should be able to look at and acknowledge as like, it's a little goofy. Like, that's a little, it's a little silly. Like, that, mind you, doesn't stop it from delving into deep themes, doesn't stop it from having like complex narratives and like super thought-provoking characters that like say really, really interesting things about the human condition. But at the end of the day, it's like, we're talking about some men in tights here, yo. Like, let's not, like, you know what I mean? Like, so, like, my content is mainly, like, comedic-based, while also based on, like, an overwhelming love of these characters. Like, so, like, I never try to make, like, content through the lens of, like, oh, I'm bashing this, or, oh, I hate this. It's more from, like, I make fun of stuff. I make fun of, like, things all the time. I make fun of different superheroes. I make fun of different characters, but it's always through like a place of profound love. Like, and because in a way you have to know something, you have to be able to understand something to make fun of it, at least accurately. So yeah.
So looking at your videos on your YouTube channel, you've got titles like Superman Restored My Faith in Humanity or Teen Titans is a Certified Hood Classic. And clearly your enthusiasm is pretty, like, infectious. I want to ask you, like, what keeps that passion alive when you're making content?
Well, first off, thank you very much for that. Like, I really try to, like, make all of, like, my content, like, feel genuine. I'm operating from the vantage point of, like, if I'm having fun with what I'm doing, if I'm having fun with what I'm watching, and, like, I'm making the type of content that I myself would enjoy, hopefully that'll translate to, you know, the audience. Hopefully other folks will enjoy it as well. But yeah, to answer your question, sometimes it can be hard. Comics can break your heart. When you attach so much of your identity to like reading month-to-month comics, and a lot of those series like will cycle through writers, like you'll cycle through toilet paper, you know what I mean? Like just one after the other, just constant like shift of like creative agendas. So like you may really enjoy 18, 20 issue run that one writer did. And then another writer will come in and just like get rid of like everything that writer set up. So, like, so it can be hard to hold on to that like passion. And yeah, this is like a very, very exciting time to be alive as like a fan of comics, as a fan of superhero media in general, because it's more normalized now than ever. It's more mainstream now than ever. We're about to get a Wonder Man TV show on Disney Plus that has like a budget behind it. Wonder Man. When I was growing up, Wonder Man was one of the lamest characters, and now he's coming to like, now Marvel is so big that even a character like him can get his own project. Wow. What a time to be alive, yo. What a time to be alive. Where a character like, we're seeing widespread public love for the new Superman movie, normalizing just being kind to folks, you know what I mean? Like doing what you can to make a difference in the world. There was this stigma that like Superman is boring. So like to see now like all the love that's being poured out from like fans. I saw Superman with my best friend who before that point had the same opinion that Superman is boring. And he came out as, yo, I'm a lifelong Superman fan, bro. So it's like, it's hard not to see stuff like that and not get excited.
I still haven't seen the new superhero movie, and you're making me ashamed to admit I was 100% on the side of Superman's too overpowered. He's too boring. This guy can do everything.
You know, it depends on the writer. It depends on what kind of story. Like there are some writers who like don't understand how to use him because he's so powerful. But if you can find like the right voice and the right story to tell with that character and use him the right way, yo, peak.
So has being a content creator specifically affected how you view these stories?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's definitely changed my perspective of how I view things because I was consuming media through that analytical lens even before like I had a platform. But since starting this venture and starting this journey, like it's just skyrocketed it up to like 11. Gotten to the point where I've consumed so much media. I've learned so much about like the mechanics of 3-act structure and how like stories work, the hero's journey, that like there are times where like I'm watching a movie with somebody or watching a show with somebody and it's like I'm literally able to like predict the plot of like what's gonna happen. It's like there was one time a couple of years ago, me and my boy was watching Knives Out. And the very first scene where Anna de Armas's character is administering the serum to the elderly gentleman that she was taking care of because like she's a nurse. As I was watching that, I turned to my boy and I was like, would it be hilarious if like she actually gave him the right dose the whole time and like he just killed himself for nothing? It was like that would be pretty crazy if it was a reality. And he just like completely silent because like that's actually what ended up happening in the yeah. It's just a lot of stuff where like I can't really turn that part of my brain off sometimes when like I'm consuming media, even when it's just like from a leisurely place. These days I'm just like watching comedy based stuff. Like I'm watching like Seinfeld is like a show that I started picking up recently.
When we talk of superheroes like Superman and Spider-Man as moral guides or ethical leaders, a lot of people can see these guys and relate to who they are as people, the sort of values and principles they follow. So I guess I'm leading to is why do you think comic books and superhero stories have filled that same kind of purpose for people?
Well, that's a fascinating question, Jay. I think like superhero stories tend to have a more like straightforward good versus evil narrative. And the reason why I think that like that format of storytelling has stood the test of time for all these years, that it reflects an aspect of the human condition that puts us in the shoes of those fighting on the front lines. Because I feel that existence in and of itself is something of a battle. It's something of a battle where every day we have to get up and fight to keep our dreams alive, to feed our families, to like do whatever task of the day that's lying ahead of us that we need to get done. And superhero stories kind of takes that metaphorical conflict that lies within us as humans and externalizes it into a sort of, external battle, for lack of a turn of phrase.
That's a great way to put it. Or superhero stories basically just laminate the fact that good and evil do exist. And no matter what ideology you come from, we can all relate to the idea of someone rising above the evil spirits of the world. When I think of more modern superhero movies, like the most recent Batman or The Boys, for example, I can't help but feel like superhero stories are kind of veering towards the more dystopian, darker, or bleaker aspects of humanity. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think what makes like the medium of comic books and superheroes so fascinating is that it's an ever-evolving genre that takes different forms throughout the years to reflect the current state of the culture that we're in. When superhero stories first started back in like the 1930s, when the Great Depression was happening and there was much more of an innate desire for folks to protect their fellow man, you had heroes like Superman and like Batman who were champions of the oppressed. You had Superman going into coal mines, confronting the exploitative leaders of those coal mines who were like sending them into unfair working conditions. Like in the 1930s, Superman was beating domestic abusers. As the years progressed into the World War II, you got a lot more patriotic superhero content. Captain America punching Hitler in the face. That's the era where the motto of truth, justice, and the American way for Superman first originated. It was actually just originally truth and justice, but during the World War II, they added that Americana element layer of patriotism. So to bring us to where we are in the culture today, where we see this influx of like more morally ambiguous, more dark, more bleak, like say the Batman, the Dark Knight trilogy, or even Zack Snyder's Justice League. But on the flip side of that, I feel what makes more recent movies like Superman and even the later Fantastic Four movie, like I think that kind of reignited the more bright, hopeful, optimistic aspect of superhero storytelling. And the reason why I think those stories have resonated so much with fans and so much with like general audiences is because times are looking bleaker than ever. We thought that we were like progressing in a certain direction. And then all of a sudden, like it feels like in the last couple of years, things have taken a hard left turn toward a direction that a lot of us aren't really fond of. So a lot of us feel like oversaturated with like the doom and gloom of like dark dystopian futures. And we find ourselves needing those kinds of optimistic stories that lift us up and inspire us and allow us to dream or believe in a version of society where we rise above these issues and become something greater than ourselves. And in essence, I feel like that's the core of like what makes a superhero, where you have ordinary people who take on these mythic totems that allow them to transcend to a level greater than themselves. Like Bruce Wayne is just Bruce Wayne, but when he becomes Batman, he becomes a force of nature, something else entirely. That kind of like duality of like man transcending into something greater is what makes superhero stories such an inspiration to the fans who enjoy them.
What other superhero novels, stories, media you think do such a good job of relating back to today?
There's this episode of the original Teen Titans animated series from 2003 that in recent years has been getting like a lot of notoriety online just for like how well they handled like this concept. 5 main characters. And like you get to know them a lot over the course of the series because they're the 5 main heroes that like you get to know. There were some episodes that were like super serious where it's like it's life or death. They're like saving the world from like a demon from hell named Trigon who's like actually Raven's father. But there's also episodes where it's like cows are being captured by this like evil piece of talking tofu that like wants to monopolize like the protein industry. One of the most acclaimed episodes that they've done is this one where they're in space fighting this oppressed alien race, and they get help from this like galactic hero named, I think his name is Val-Yor. He's super charismatic, like he's super cool, like he understands like all the Beast Boys jokes and like everybody loves him. But he looks at Starfire, who is a character who is also an alien. She's like the alien of the group, like she comes from another planet. And he looks at her and he starts calling her Troc. And like everybody just assumes that it's like some kind of like, oh, it's an affectionate nickname or something. And it's like, oh, you know, because like he looks at Robin has spiky hair, so he's like, hey, Spike, let's go. Or like he looks at like Beast Boy who has green skin and he's like, hey, Gritty, let's go. So he's like, he calls Starfire Troc, and everybody's like, oh, they don't think anything of it. And like it's not until Cyborg, who like half man, half machine, and also like a black man, notices that like she kind of withdrawn. Not until like he notices that, oh no, he doesn't even notice. He calls her Troc.
Go, Trocky!
Thinking that like it was cool. And she was like, don't ever call me that, yo. Like, don't ever call me that. And he's like, what? I thought, like, Valior calls you that all the time. It's like, yeah, that's an insult. In our language, it means that, like, you're nothing. That you're lesser than. Essentially, like, the alien equivalent to a racial slur. And Cyborg's like, wow, so he's been calling you, like, this terrible name this whole time. And you know that, like, if you were to say something or if you were to, like, punch him out or, like, do whatever, it would just confirm all of, like, the negative things that he thinks about you. And she's like, yeah, how could you possibly know that? And he's like, of course I understand that. I'm part robot. When it's like really like some text in that scene is like, yeah, but like you're also black. So it's like, but it's like, and essentially at the end, like they work together with this racist dude Valior to like save this planet. Even though like the whole time like he's berating her, like he's talking down to her, he's calling her truck, like this, that, and the third, and she actually ends up like saving his life at one point. Like literally like goes against his wishes, being like, no, don't touch me, you filthy truck. Like, and she like saves his life. That's when like Cyborg tells like the rest of the Titans what's going on. Instead of like being like, whoa, is that what he really meant? All the Titans instantly got behind Starfire, yo, and they're like, yo, you ain't welcome here, dog. Like you need to get to stepping. And it's like that solidarity, like the way that they like all like without question just like stood behind their friend in that moment was like really like it resonated with a lot of people, me included, just because like it's like there are a lot of shows that tackle racism or from like a broad sense, like which the X-Men stories tend to do. They'll tackle racism from like an institutional sense, but this is more of like that. This is that like day-to-day racism. Everybody has had like a coworker who has like crazy views and says like some fucked up things that you don't agree with, but you still have to be cordial with and work with. But at the end of the day, it's like the people who like really matter, the people who like you really care about will judge you for like the content of your character, not just because of like where you came from or how you look. So yeah, that was one that really resonated like with me, to be able to like translate these kinds of complex issues onto like and in a digestible way on a kids show on Cartoon Network. Like
yeah, kids show going from more the racism that we see on a day-to-day basis and also talking about multiverses and stuff. This is so loaded for a 6-year-old comic show. That's so
nah,
crazy.
for real. We was well fed back then, yo. They don't make them like that no more. They don't.
It's equally important that shows can tackle the more systemic side and the more day-to-day personal side of racism. So it's really cool how you're able to bring up both sides of those examples. As a person who's not as familiar with the superhero world, which superheroes would you suggest to someone not as familiar with it?
My favorite superhero is such like a complicated question. I feel like every time like I transition into a new stage, I kind of take on a new figure that I like look up to as like, yo, this is my guy. This is my favorite character. Like right now, I would say that probably Spider-Man, which would be like the obvious answer. Right, obviously the most popular answer, like he's the GOAT for a reason, you know what I mean? But like his, which is crazy because his comics, especially lately, have not been very well received, and I feel like part of it is because he's so popular. The editorial board like wants to like stick their hands in it and be like, okay, you have to do this, you have to do that. So it's become a very like editorially mandated book that doesn't leave a lot of room for like creative storytelling, but for Elseworld stories, like, because I'm sure you're familiar, like, as a sci-fi fan with the concept of the multiverse and stuff.
Yeah.
That's how you get, like, your actually creative Spider-Man stories that can, like, do something different and take risks from the mainline continuity. Like, while the mainline 616 universe Spider-Man is doing, like, pretty terribly in terms of critically and, like, financially, like, Ultimate Spider-Man, the Ultimate Universe, Earth 1610, is doing, dang, people are loving that book. Because that's given folks like the version of Spider-Man that like we desperately have been craving for like the longest time. Yeah, Spider-Man has always been like a very long enduring one for me, even despite how much like his comics disappoint me sometimes. I would say the original Ultimate Spider-Man would be like my favorite. It was the first like attempt at a full like revamp of Spider-Man for a new generation, where like they started the whole universe from scratch and just like, yo, main universe continuity Spider-Man is over there. Over here, we're doing something completely different. And because they had that creative freedom, Brian Michael Bendis was just allowed to just write his own ticket, take it in a completely different direction. And it made everything a lot easier to understand because there's not like 65 years of history attached to this universe. The book goes on for years, but like it all takes place within the span of a year. So it's like you're seeing this 15-year-old kid like having to like balance high school and like not even old enough to drive, and like fighting characters like the Sandman and stuff. Bendis tackles it from such like a realistic, naturalistic vantage point, because like he was one of the writers that first started attributing naturalistic dialogue to like superhero comics. Just made it a lot more like entertaining and energetic to read. Like all the characters just were so distinct and had such like unique voices. Spider-Man, Ultimate Spider-Man, like definitely my favorite distillation of the character.
I don't know when they came up with the whole idea of the multiverse, but that is one of the most fantastic ideas ever from a storytelling perspective.
But yeah, the multiverse, I don't know exactly if it's the first instance of multiverse stories in media or fiction in general, but the first, I believe, like in comics is, I think in the Flash story back in like, it was the mid to beginning 1950s, the Flash of Two Worlds, where, so essentially, in DC started with what's known as the golden age of comics, which is where characters like Batman, Superman, and Alan Scott, Green Lantern, the one who inexplicably has a red shirt, and like, yeah, that's where those iterations of those characters like first came from, the very first that like paved the way, and eventually leading to the formation of the Justice Society. So in the 1950s is when the Silver Age began, because that's when they gave the character of the Flash the revamp, the one who police forensic investigator who got struck by lightning and doused in chemicals and like has the red suit, the classic red suit that everybody knows. And they were taking this as like, okay, this is an entirely new continuity. And the Golden Age Flash, Jay Garrick, is just a comic book that this Flash grew up reading. In the 1950s, there came this like kind of event where through, I guess, like a multi-dimensional gateway, him and Jay Garrick actually end up meeting each other and teaming up. And you find out that the writer that wrote the original Flash's comics that the new Flash grew up reading actually was like a multiversal like conduit who like was exposed to that universe through his dreams and was just using that as inspiration for those stories. So that was the first, at least to the best of my knowledge, that was the first like real occurrence of a multiverse being in the concept of a multiverse being introduced in a comic book story. And from there, the rest is pretty well history. And yeah, like you said, like it does like open up the doors for so many potentials for like really, really dope stories. Specifically with Batman. Batman is the one who gets a lot of like the Elseworld stories, a lot of like the interesting reimaginings. Like there's this one that takes place in the steampunk universe in England back in the day. It's called Gotham by Gaslight, where like Batman fights Jack the Ripper. And like that, just like so the wildest stuff you could possibly think of. Like there's one where Superman, instead of landing in Kansas, he lands in communist Russia. Or no, he lands in Ukraine. And that one's called Superman Red Sun. That's another good one. So it's like there's so many different like avenues that you could take with these characters just by changing one key detail that like can create the potential for so many like interesting stories. But on the flip side, I feel like the multiverse, like especially with superhero stories, often opens the door for like lazy writing in a way, or like using it as like a cop-out. They'll kill off a character, someone like Ant-Man or somebody, they'll kill somebody off and like they'll telegraph the hell out of it. They'll like run headlines being like the death of Wonder Woman, the death of Robin, the death of Nightwing. And then like a couple months will pass, the writers will be like, damn, I really miss Ambush Bug. Damn, I really miss Buana Beast. Man, I really miss Booster Gold. Let's just pull one from the multiverse and make it so that like they'll pull one from the multiverse, another universe completely. They'll come over to this universe and they'll just act like nothing happened. So it's like, yeah, like it kind of kills like the immersion of it in a way, because as a fan, you feel like you can't really get invested in much, because at any point, some multiverse shenanigans can occur that'll like just sweep up everything that was like established in like the previous storylines and previous continuities.
Yeah, especially going back to like how both of us tend to look at movies. You're probably like seeing like a death like Ant-Man or Spider-Man. You're like, oh, here we go again. I know in 6 months we're gonna see him back and he's gonna be reintroduced. We're sort of dancing around the whole morality of superheroes. And I remember you telling me a little bit about how you grew up Christian. I was wondering if you could just take me through your experiences going from Bible stories to more superhero stories, and what came into play there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you said, like I grew up in the church, like very religious family, very religious household. I would grow up reading all like these stories about like, Moses in the burning bush and like, Samson getting like lost in the sauce and like getting like killed because of it, and like all these like characters who like have like had various like supernatural encounters, and like while also giving like these like moral guides and like moral lessons of like how best to live life. And while like I definitely do think that like there is merit to that, like every Bible story like does have like something like important that you could take from it. I feel like the reason why I gravitate more towards superhero stories is because they're lessons in morality folks like you and me can look up to, but told through a much more contemporary, easy to digest vantage point. With superhero stories, it's like those are the characters that I found myself gravitating toward like the most, especially like as someone with like, my dad was not always like, around when I was a kid, and like still like isn't. So like for a lot of like my most like important formative years, I grew up not really having that like strong father figure who was able to like be the blueprint of like, what a man should be, or like what like I wanted like my life to look like. So instead, like I would look to characters like Superman, like Batman, characters like Spider-Man, who like despite all odds and despite like the odds being stacked against them, despite having like coming from like tragic backgrounds, they're able to overcome all the obstacles that are like thrown at them to like rise above it and become something greater than themselves, to fight for something greater than themselves. And that always, those kinds of stories are like what gives me the courage, like whether as a writer, whether as an artist, whether as a content creator, to get up every day and and pursue my dreams, pursue the things that like I want for myself and for my life. There are days where it's like I question if what I do like has any real like value to it, or has any real like, if I should just like, maybe I should just like give up and get a real job. And then like I'll revisit like one of those books from my childhood. Like even like comics aside, one of my favorite book series of all time that I grew up watching, that I reread whenever I can, Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series, along with the sequel series to that, Heroes of Olympus. Absolute peak fiction. And those stories represent like everything that I love about the nature of telling stories. I think even Superman said it once: dreams transform us. They lift us up and make us stronger. And yeah, I feel like superheroes like tap into the dreamer that lives within us all. The like that inner child that like aspires to make a difference in the world, that aspires to like be the change they want to see in the world, that aspires to like, make a positive impact on people's lives. And, that's what I try to do through like all the content that I make, all the stories that I write, all the art that I create. Like, I just want to do like whatever little part that I can to like, even if it's just for like one moment, if one of my videos just for one moment can like make someone smile, make someone laugh, even if just for a moment they can like get a quick reprieve from like whatever they're facing in like their own lives, like then everything that like all the work that I put into it, everything I've had to sacrifice, it was all worth it.
That was really well put, Chris. That was awesome. I was really appreciated what you said there. The world is not made up of black and white, good versus evil, and instead it's a lot more morally gray. What do you think it means to be a good person in a superhero story that's more morally?
See, now that's an interesting question. The first quote that popped off to me isn't even from like a superhero story, or isn't even from like a comic book or anything. It's from a cartoon called The Boondocks.
I love The Boondocks.
There's this episode where there's this guy who was wrongfully imprisoned. I think he was like a political activist who was wrongfully imprisoned and set for execution. And the main character, Huey, who is like this like 11-year-old kid, is like just stressing about it the whole episode. He's like trying to like do everything that he can to like stop this execution from happening. But like he's a kid, like he's powerless to do anything about it. Looks like it's gonna go through. Huey's at his wit's end. He looks at his granddad. Granddad, like, what do you do when you're in a situation where like you can't do nothing, but there's nothing you can do? Now, like his granddad looks at him and he goes, "You do what you can." And it's like, that's what I feel like would be the words that I would live by. If like a meteor were to strike down and like I were magically to like get superpowers or something, or like if I were to get bitten by a radioactive spider or like find a Green Lantern ring or whatever, I feel like those would be the words that like I would live by. Because if you're a superhero, you can't save everybody. Like it's not even Superman can save everybody, bro. Like he's only like, yeah, he has like nigh omnipotent power. Like, yeah, he's one of the most powerful superheroes to ever exist. But at the end of the day, he's still a person. And that's what I feel like the Superman movie, the more recent Superman movie, captured so well. Despite all his power, like he can only do so much. He's only like one person. He's still just a man. He's still like the man part is just as important as the super part. So it's like you're not always going to be able to save everybody. Like you ask any doctor, you ask any therapist, you ask any fireman, you ask any like first responder, like anybody whose job it is to like save people for a living, they will tell you that you cannot save everybody that you come across. But it's important that like regardless of how much power you have in any given situation, regardless of how much strength you have, no matter what you have like the bandwidth to do, that it's like I still try to wake up every day, even though knowing that there's days where I will fail, there's days where I will fall short, there's days where I'll make a mistake, where I'll mess up. There's plenty. You need a list, I will be able to give it to you beat for beat. Like I mess up like 25 times before breakfast. I make mistakes like like mistakes are like breathing for me. Like they happen constantly and everywhere. So it's like regardless of what mistakes I know I'm probably going to make, I still try to wake up every day trying to be better than the day I was before, and trying my best to like make a positive impact in the world. And it's like, that's all I feel like any of us can expect from ourselves and from each other. It's just like, do what you can.
I think that's a really great way to look at it. How about for the other side of the spectrum now? But are there other superheroes out there who ultimately are just pointed in the wrong direction, and it's up to the storytellers to slowly teeter the ship around?
Yeah, like there's lots of characters like that. I feel like there was a period where like anti-heroes were in, yo. Like whether you're Deadpools, your Punishers, your Harley Quinns. Yeah. Sometimes I feel like it works better than others. And that's sometimes how I feel about characters like say Harley Quinn, where like they do this huge like marketing push. Looking from the outside, I could see the corporate influence in that decision. They saw Suicide Squad in 2016 and like everybody like wanting to cosplay as her like in that year, and just like, hey, like, well, it would be a lot easier for us to market her if she was like an anti-hero of sorts, so we could like put her on like lunchboxes next to like Batman and Superman and stuff. And it's like that's what ended up happening. So to me, it's like an outside viewer like seeing like the fact that like you're an accomplice to the Joker, who like literally like is like out here killing kids, out here like doing all sorts, all manner of evil. Like sometimes it's hard for me to like look outside of like, what does this mean like on a societal level? It's complicated. Suffice it to say, it's complicated. There's been a lot of characters I've seen who like started as like very morally upstanding individuals, had a bit of a fall from grace, and like succumbed to like their darker impulses, and while still being able to come out on the other side like and redeem themselves somewhat. Like Hal Jordan Green Lantern, known by many as like the greatest of the Green Lanterns. Like there was a storyline in the 90s where, off the back of a Superman story actually, like his entire hometown of Coast City got destroyed, like completely like leveled, and everybody in it died because of like something that a Superman villain did. And so like the grief for like everybody in his city and like the like guilt of not being able to stop it like kind of like drove him insane. And he kind of went on this like power hungry tirade where like he just like laid waste to the entire Green Lantern Corps and like wanted to take all the power for himself, because he wanted to use the Green Lantern ring, his Green Lantern ring, to recreate Coast City and like bring like everybody he knew, bring them back with the power of the Green Lantern ring, which is against the code. And because like he was denied by the Guardians who gave him the ring, it was like, hey, if you're not going to let me do it, I'm going to take it by force, and you're not going to like how I do it. So he just starts slaughtering fools, yo. Like killing folks left and right, people he used to fight alongside, people who used to be his friends. Like he's just like, I don't give a fuck about nobody, yo. He was laying waste. He was on that demon time. And so like he does all this stuff, like practically causes like a damn near genocide of the Green Lantern Corps to the point where like there's only one left who like has to bring the entire Corps back from like scratch and like literally becomes like a multiversal threat, like a multiversal villain. But like years pass, and essentially like in another story where like a villain essentially like is draining the sun of like its resources and like plunging the earth into like never-ending darkness, and like basically like the sun is being extinguished and like humanity is basically like on the brink of extinction. Hal Jordan, who like after doing all this and like changing his name from Green Lantern to Parallax, ends up like in a last moment of heroic sacrifice, sacrifices himself to reignite the sun. And like because of that, like he basically like was able to, he came back eventually because, you know, comics, but like he was still able to like have that like redemption of like, despite how far he fell, when it came down to it, he was still able to like rise to the occasion and be the hero that like, you know, everybody remembered him to be.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I guess I want to ask, was there ever a real life situation, a specific challenge or moment where you had to make like a split decision, a call, and you realized that you learned more from a superhero compared to a story in the Bible?
That's a very good question. The first story that pops off in my brain is I was in, I want to say grade 11. Me and a friend of mine were walking around the Walmart near her place, and we see this dude is seemingly harassing this woman, essentially. Like she was like touching her and like she was clearly like not comfortable with it. Like I was very young, very like unsure of myself, like very uncomfortable in my own body. But even in that moment, I remember like standing up and being ready to like, you know, do something about it. So I get up thinking that like, I don't know what I thought I was going to do, but I was planning on doing something. But luckily, I guess someone else beat me to it, set him packing. So he left. And as we're leaving the Walmart, we see the same dude lying on his back outside. He looked like he was in some really bad shape and he was just completely out of it. We didn't know if he was like high on something, if he was like just drunk out of his mind, if he was tripping balls or like what was going on. But like, even though like he was clearly like not a great dude who was doing some like really, really despicable stuff, like I still felt like an innate desire to at least like, you know, check on him and like see how he was doing. I get down on my knees to like meet him at eye level, and I was asking him, hey man, are you okay? Like, do you need like medical attention? Do you need me to call somebody? Like, are you good? He just starts going on this whole like tirade and like giving me his whole life story basically about like how he used to be like a concert pianist. Through many discouraging experiences that he faced in his life, he essentially got to a point where he was just like, you know what, fuck it, I give up. And like, yeah, he lost everything, lost his family, to the point where now he just like roams the streets as this like, you know, guy who feels he has no real hope in his life. Growing up in church, I was taught that like when hearing those types of stories, that like your innate desire should be to like, you know, convert this person to Christianity, to like show him, drive him toward like, you know, salvation, like tell him about like his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and whatnot. But the story that this guy was telling me was so deeply depressing. I couldn't even think of anything that I could tell him that could give him some kind of comfort. But in that moment, I remembered this episode of Justice League Unlimited where Batman was fighting this supervillain who was like, she was 12 years old, like 12, 13, around that age. She was really young, who essentially had the power to warp reality. Acquired her powers through like governmental experimentation, and she essentially like was succumbing to this disease that was like shortening her lifespan. So as a result, her powers were going haywire, and like she was causing lots of destruction, lots of chaos. And Amanda Waller, the government operative who acts as a liaison with the Justice League oftentimes, basically gives Batman this device that's designed to kill her. So Batman's whole thing in the Justice League Unlimited series and like in majority of Batman fiction is that he doesn't kill. He doesn't take a life. And he like, since his parents were taken from him through the act of murder, he vows to never do the same to anyone else. So this is essentially like the ultimate moral test for Batman, having to kill a child for the greater good of society. He goes, he meets her, but since she can read his mind, she can also tell that he's not going to use it. So he's like, yeah, I'm not going to use it. And he just like throws it away. And instead, all he does is he sits down next to her and he just stays with her until her time comes. And before she passes away, she does reverse all the damage that she did. Just being there for her, it gave her the strength to, you know, in her last dying moments, fix what she had destroyed. So as this dude, this homeless person is like sitting on the ground, like in shambles, telling me his life story, instead of like trying to like, you know, what I feel would be opportunistically like convert him to like Christianity in some sense. Instead, I was just like, you know what, let me just listen. Because this guy was going on for a long time. For like, we were there for like half an hour. So I got the sense that like I was probably the first person who was ever just willing to sit with him and just be there with him and listen. And yeah, that's what I did. And eventually, like through that, I feel like I gave him, like, without even really saying anything, I feel like I gave him a level of introspection to where he even started to look at himself and being like, man, and here I was, like, you know, harassing this poor lady and like, what the hell is wrong with me? And I was like, I should get some help. And that's where I felt like, well, if you need some help, if you need some resources, like my church has some resources if you want to look into it. Like, and like, yeah. And I called him an ambulance and yeah, that was a whole thing. And that's one of the main instances that I can think of where like the superhero media that I consumed changed the way that I would have reacted in that moment or how I would have handled that given situation.
That is such an awesome story, Chris. And it really shows who you are as a person at the end of the day. A lot of people wouldn't even think to go and try to seek an understanding with this person. I always have believed that you won't actually make any progress as a society or as a group or a community of any sort unless you actually reach an understanding with the other party, the person who you're having a disagreement with. Was there a specific superhero who, I guess, raised you in a way, and someone who actually was your influence or inspiration for deciphering right versus wrong?
I would say Superman, 100%. Yeah. Just because Superman was my first superhero that I was ever exposed to, and especially when I was younger, he was my guy. I fucked with Superman heavy, yo. He was always like my favorite. But when I went into kindergarten, I feel like the other kids. And like when I got into like kindergarten, grade 1, I feel like the other kids, I noticed that they didn't really mess with Superman the same way I did because like they had the like common misconception of Superman that like, oh, he's boring, oh, he's a square, oh, he's a Boy Scout, oh, he doesn't do nothing. They were on that Batman train. Mm-hmm. So everybody would be like, yo, Superman is so lame, bro. Superman is so lame. And I look at him and be like, oh yeah, like Superman is so lame, yo. And it was like it was like Peter after Jesus died. He was like, I denied this motherfucker 3 times. It's like, hey, I don't know him like that. So it's like, but as I grew older and as I found myself looking for that kind of moral guidance, I found myself looking back to Superman stories and how he handles things and just like how, despite the fact that can't always punch his way out of a situation, he always goes out of his way to do the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it's complicated, and even when it's not 100% clear what that right thing is.
It's a great answer. Great answer. Thank you, Chris. Everyone deals with certain issues in some capacity. For me, I deal with a lot of anxiety from time to time, and a lot of science fiction stories, specifically certain characters, I can really relate to when they deal with anxiety and that sort of thing. And so is there a specific comic or superhero story that got you out of rough times in general that you sort of relate back to?
A specific comic?
Or superhero in general?
I think, like, again, I hate to bring it back to Spider-Man again.
Do it.
One of the things that I feel like I relate to the most about him is that Peter Parker is a deeply, like, insecure person who, like, is burdened by his own self-loathing. His view of himself isn't accurate to who he actually is. Like, he holds himself to such a high standard that he'll never be able to fully live up to that standard. And I myself, like, I struggle with, like, my self-esteem a lot. A lot of people would think that, like, I'm in this position where, like, I have things figured out that I really don't. And it's not until, like, other people can take me and be like, hey, like, you're actually, like, a pretty decent person. Like, yeah, you make mistakes. Yeah, you mess up sometimes. But, like, you're a good person. And, like, you do your best to, like, be that type of person. And, like, I struggle to even when people give me compliments, like I struggle to like internalize that message, and I struggle to like internalize that positive feedback. I don't know if it's because like I grew up being so used to getting negative feedback as like someone with undiagnosed ADHD that I didn't find out that I had until like late on in high school, to where like I was always used to getting that like negative reinforcement from like my parents, from my teachers, from like people who assumed that like the way I act and like the way that I learn is due to like some sort of like moral failing or like personality flaw, when really it's just like how my brain is wired. So yeah, to bring that back to Spider-Man, it's like there are multiple stories where like he views himself as this like C-tier hero who like is like on the bottom of the barrel, who like can't stack up to like the heroes that he looks up to, like say the Iron Mans or the Captain Americas and the Thors. But when you see Spider-Man through the lens of other characters in their books, like there's a Daredevil story where like he's describing Spider-Man like in his like internal monologue, and he's like, Spider-Man doesn't even realize how powerful like he really is. Like he's literally like the best of us, and like he treats himself like he's lesser than, and like he always goes out of his way to like he always acts like he has something to prove, or that like he's not your equal, when really he's like the one of the most powerful, like most morally upstanding individuals that I've ever met. So it's those types of stories, those types of dichotomies of like how we see ourselves versus how other people perceive us, really like gives me a certain amount of perspective, and like it's really like encouraged me to make a more conscious effort to work on my self-esteem, to work on how I talk to myself, to work on how I view myself. And yeah.
Damn, that is right off the get-go. Like you mentioned how you don't think people externally see you that way. Never would I ever assume from our conversations that you have any self-esteem issues at all. You seem like a really stand-up, confident guy and stuff like that. And
I had it well.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's so paradoxical, because I think so many people can relate to having this low self-esteem and like looking at yourself in the mirror and conjuring up the unwanted thoughts that you really can't help with, and that if we all just can open our eyes up and look objectively, we could lift this veil over our heads. But it's so much easier said than done. Are there any superheroes out there that sort of give you a purpose in life? What superhero makes you want to help people, and how do you want to go about helping people?
One of the more recent runs of the Nightwing comics, a lot of people were really liking it. It was written by this writer called Tom Taylor, and the first arc is called Leaping into the Light. So Nightwing is Dick Grayson, the original Robin, who essentially grew up and decided to form his own identity as Nightwing, separate from Batman. He moved out of Gotham to another city called Bloodhaven, which is essentially Gotham, but even worse. And like the story picks up in this period in Batman's history where Alfred was recently murdered by Bane. And essentially, Barbara Gordon, Batgirl, gets a hold of Alfred's will and reads it out to Dick Grayson, Nightwing, and essentially tells him that Nightwing is now like the sole beneficiary of Alfred's entire estate, because you find out that Alfred, apart from being Batman's butler, is also like a leading shareholder in Wayne Enterprises, and by proxy, like something of a billionaire. And all of that now belongs to Dick Grayson. Grayson takes a few like weeks to think about it and really like think about, okay, how do I want to like use this money to like make my community a better place? And he essentially uses it to become a philanthropist, to make his community of Bloodhaven a better place, redistributing his wealth to places and resources where folks who need it most will be able to benefit from it as well. And that was a really like one of my favorite Nightwing runs that I've ever read, like in my tenure as a comic book fan. And it really exemplified why Nightwing is one of my favorite characters in DC. He's basically like a more well-adjusted Batman, essentially. Like he's Batman like if he went to therapy. Like with like the hope and the optimism of characters like Superman, which I feel like that balance is what makes Nightwing such like a universal force in DC.
That is awesome. And I'm assuming Nightwing, or aka Robin, is very similar to Batman in that he's compared to all these other superheroes in these universes in the fact that he doesn't have like an actual superpower like flying or something like that. And I feel like that's also just part of the reason why I'm sure a lot of fans can relate to him, just as the more common or average superhero fan draws towards Batman, because he doesn't have the same powers and abilities as a lot of other superheroes. Now I just have a question on the top of my head. And you mentioned earlier that one of Batman's codes is that he doesn't kill people, so maybe that's just the entire answer. But I've always wondered, as a layman Batman DC fan, why doesn't he just like end Joker? I feel like Joker always comes back to bite him in future editions, future series. Why doesn't he just like throw him in jail or put it all to rest?
Well, the simple answer is that he can't within the confines of the law. And by like, Batman essentially sees himself as something of like, I guess you could call him like a janitor, who like grounds up all like the trash of Gotham and puts it in a way to where like the police can do what their job is supposed to be, allowing the justice system to run its course. If the Joker were to actually like exist in the real world, he would have gotten the death penalty like years ago. But because of the nature of long form superhero media and long form superhero comics, they're obviously not going to kill the Joker because he's so profitable, which kind of creates this revolving door that is Arkham Asylum, to where you throw Joker in prison, he like stays there for a couple storylines, and then eventually like he ends up breaking out, causing more havoc. Right. So that's essentially like the short answer. There have been like multiple, like so many different stories that have like explored this like dichotomy through so many different angles. One of the most classic is like the Killing Joke, where Batman tries to extend an olive branch to Joker at the end of the story, despite like in that story, Joker essentially like attacks one of Batman's proteges, Batgirl, at her home outside of costume, shoots her in the spine, cripples her, and like kidnaps her father, Commissioner Gordon, and like essentially like tortures him. But even at the end of that story, Batman catches him at the end and he's like, look, I don't want to beat you. Like, I don't want to like fight you. I don't want to like, put you in the hospital. I just want you to get help. I just want you to like be a better version of yourself. And it's like, if you like, let me get you the help that you need. And Joker essentially like tells him this joke. Actually, there's these two mental patients who are escaping a psych ward, and they're on the roof. The guards are like about to like chase them down and like catch them. And there's another building close by, but the gap between the two buildings is too wide for them to jump. So one of the inmates is like, look, here's what we'll do. I'll shine my flashlight across to the other end, and you can walk across the beam of the flashlight to the other side, to the other building. And the other inmate looks at him and he's like, what do you think I am, crazy? You just turned the beam off halfway before I get across. So it's kind of like to illustrate the fact that like one inmate that's insane is trying to act like he's any less sane than the other inmate. Right. It's essentially saying that like they're both just as crazy as the other. And like Joker tells this joke to essentially tell Batman, like, look, we're both equally crazy. Like, I'm like a serial killer who goes around killing people dressed as a clown. You're a guy who dresses up as a bat in a bat suit and like punches criminals in the face. Like, if you look at it objectively, we're both not sane people. So the fact that you would sit here and try to like, pontificate to me talking about like something you can help me is like the biggest joke of all. So it's interesting how like different stories kind of tackle this dichotomy of like, should Batman kill the Joker or should he not? Because essentially like Batman's philosophy is that like his goal is like to help these criminals, to like, like he's trying to be like, not the Punisher, but a fireman, like who like puts out like the damage and like prevents them from doing better within the confines of the law, like, or at least as much as he can.
Right. Joker's so meta. I honestly thought Batman kind of just enjoyed the dichotomy they have between the two. And he's like, I'm just going to save him for our next battle in a few years. We can save him for later. But I never...
Yeah, that's a popular theory. That's a popular theory. That's not...
I never realized Batman's like basically just like Dog the Bounty Hunter of Gotham. Like he just wrangles up the criminals, but lets the police do their job. All right. It was a pleasure, Chris. Super cool meeting you.